Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument, hosted by the militant, Marxist, anti-Santa, Martyn Bradbury. The Bradbury Group is streamed live on Rover, Sky TV, YouTube and Facebook. Proudly sponsored by Watea, journalism you can trust. Let the arguments begin.
Kia ora Aotearoa. The true demarcation of power in a late-stage capitalism, liberal, progressive democracy is the 1% richest plus their 9% enablers versus the 90% rest of us. And once you see politics through that lens, the left can never lose an election again. Welcome to the Bradbury Group Election 26, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. I'm your host, the editor of the daily blog, Martyn Bradbury. Bomber to my comrades, Mr. Bradbury if you're nasty. My pronouns are us and we. Coming up on this evening's show, the political panel all-stars tonight are listener, columnist and militant cyclist Simon Wilson and former New Zealand Herald columnist and current editor of The Post, Matthew Hooton. Tonight's one-on-one and 10 is the co-leader of the Greens, Chloe Swarbrick, who recently released tax plan has been derided as envy. But on a burning planet with unprecedented inequality and the threat of AI, isn't taxing billionaires less envy and more basic survival? Spoiler alert, it isn't envy. Our extra one-on-one tonight is the Speaker of the House of New Zealand, the Right Honourable Gerry Brownlee, on the quality of democracy under his time as Speaker, his thoughts on Scrutiny Week, and why democracy is so bloody important. Shout out to Kiwi Skirt and Kiwi Bird for moderating tonight's YouTube page. Good evening to all the Bradbury Easters online watching right now. You make this show one of the most watched live podcasts in New Zealand, and your comments will appear on screen as we go. Shout out to Watea, Facebook, Rover, Spotify, Apple Podcast and Sky TV whānau. Remember to like and subscribe because that's all that's holding the fourth estate together right now. And our Twitter panel this evening is Tim Selwyn. He'll be tweeting live online at Twitter, hashtag the Bradbury Group. Before all that, however, is this week's War on News. Brothers and sisters, so it's 123 days of Trump's 3-week war that he's already won 17 times, and the Strait of Hormuz is still shut after America and Iran both started shooting at each other. Trump is struggling to find a way to explain to the American people why he's offering a $400 billion package to Iran if he's won so many times. I've destroyed you. Now here's $400 billion is not the war his MAGA supporters signed up for. Indeed, they thought they were getting out of needless, endless wars in the Middle East altogether, which is hilarious because there is no war more needless, endless and Middle Easty than this current illegal, pointless one he launched in a desperate attempt to get the Epstein files out of the news headlines. Let's not forget that. The $400 billion package is so attractive, Greenland is having second thoughts about Trump invading them. I mean, if Trump is dropping almost $500 billion on oopsies, we would welcome an ill-conceived American invasion. Don't forget that the Prime Minister, Chris Luxon, initially wanted to support this fiasco. Talking of orange assholes, Matua Shane Jones has described any questions regarding his private limo expenses at a mining jamboree as the media, and I quote, laundering lies to undermine him. The great Matua went on to claim the media were, and I quote, breathless hobbits trying to poison the well to stop New Zealand First from being triumphant. Shane Stretch Jones, as he's now known, refused to answer any direct questions about his mining cocktail piss-up junket and tried to explain away why he had a limo on standby for a function right next to his hotel, which was difficult after he initially defended the limo by claiming there was a blizzard, when there is actually no such evidence of snow in Toronto during his trip at all. Instead, he said any questions were, and again I quote, falsehoods designed to try and undermine the Matua. Shane refers to himself in the third person so often, he's had to get a new postal address. The Matua then claimed the media were trying to malign him just like, and again I quote, the left-wing media sought to obstruct Trump's rise. Martua Shane Stretch Jones seems to believe that he will skirt scrutiny of his limo and cocktail costs after gaining sympathy by recasting himself as Donald Trump. That's a bit like Satan wearing a Hitler costume for the Instagram likes. I think before New Zealand first defined what is a woman, maybe Shane Jones needed to define what a taxpayer-funded perk is. And finally this week, New Zealand First nobody, Mark Patterson, has released a social media post attacking the Greens over the genetic engineering bill. That's not what the funny part is. The funny part is that Mark Patterson's social media team decided to put his post to the Dire Straits global anthem, Money for Nothing, which begs the question, did New Zealand First just steal money for nothing from Dire Straits? I'm not sure Dire Straits would be New Zealand First supporters. Remember when National fought Eminem for taking a song that sounded like his? And they had to pay a fortune, and Stephen Joyce described it all as pretty legal? Can someone please contact Dire Straits and see if they think it's pretty legal for New Zealand First to be taking one of their greatest hits for a political attack on the Green Party? I think New Zealand First may find that it is money for something and the checks are not free. The political panel all-stars up shortly, Whānau, but first this week's 1-on-1 in 10 with co-leader of the Greens, Chloe Swarbrick. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful.
Thank you so much for having me, Bomber.
Chloe, I want to start by congratulating you and the Greens for what I believe is the most righteous economic justice tax package ever produced for Aotearoa New Zealand. You have recognised the real problems our economy, society and communities are facing from climate change, inequality and AI. As far as I'm concerned, everyone on the New Zealand left owes the Greens an enormous debt of gratitude that you are being so bold, and I don't give three shits if it was released early or had an error. The morality and gravity of your argument eclipses any mistakes made. Have you been happy with the response to date?
Hey, thank you so much, Bomber. It genuinely means the world. Look, I just think that we can have an economy that works for regular working people, and in fact actually also works for those who are sitting pretty and handsomely at the top. And that's actually what you get when everybody contributes their fair share to our society. We end up with a country that is healthier and happier and safer. So yes, we unashamedly and unapologetically have put forward proposals which would rebalance our tax system, provide New Zealanders who work for a living, 96% of them with an income tax cut, by virtue of implementing a wealth tax on the super rich for those who have net assets in excess of $10 million. What all of that would do, importantly, is not only provide the immediate relief for hardworking New Zealanders, but it would also unlock the resources necessary to decommodify some of these essentials of life, which in turn reduces our cost of living. And I think that latter point is actually what is currently being lost in the wash, because people will remember that this current national government came to power promising that it would give everybody a tax cut and put more money in their back pocket. But that has just resulted in, as a result of the shredding of the state that has come with it, increased or costs that have been displaced into other places. For example, increases in prescription fees and public transport fares and road user charges and so on and so forth. So the other really important component of this economic proposition is that it is ultimately about building an economy that actually generates jobs, generates local prosperity and well-being for all New Zealanders. So yes, I am stoked about it, and I'm also really stoked about the reception that we've had. Funnily enough, I've even had some people come up to me who have self-identified as being within the captured tax brackets of the wealth tax and stated that they would happily pay this because for them, that's what patriotism looks like.
Preach.
That allowed them to build that wealth.
Look, let's get into the details of what you've proposed, because I think it's amazing. The Greens will introduce a 2.5% tax on the net assets of the super rich above 10 million with an exemption for family homes. They will return the corporate tax rate gloriously to 33% for the 0.7% biggest corporations like the supermarket duopoly, energy companies and banks. You will keep the corporate tax rate at 28% for small and medium enterprises, levelling the playing field for local businesses. You will introduce a bank levy, thank God, of 0.6% on the liabilities of the 4 biggest banks, just like Australia has. You will make big tech companies pay their fair share by enforcing the 5% withholding tax on the profits they send offshore. You will reverse Luxon's landlord tax cuts and the changes to the Bright Line test, and the first $10,000 will be tax-free. How is it envy to make the mega wealthy pay more for the infrastructure we need?
Well, funnily enough, one of the things that really boggles my mind is that we have been pointing out what the basic facts are since the High Wealth Individuals report produced by IRD in 2022-2023.
Yes.
And what that said is that the wealthiest people in this country, I believe in that report, with an average net wealth of around $296 million per household, were paying an effective tax rate less than half of that of the average hardworking New Zealander. So what that means in practice is that multi-millionaires and billionaires currently are paying effectively $9 in tax out of every $100 that they earn. Meanwhile, nurses, teachers, firefighters, hairdressers are paying $22 out of every $100 that they earn. So there is a basic fundamental point here on fairness. Just why is it that we're not paying the equivalent tax rate? But then there is also that bigger point, I believe, of unlocking the resources that is necessary to actually lift all boats so that all New Zealanders have the opportunity to thrive. And this is the other, I think, really critical point, which of course you will understand, Bomber. We have done these things in the past. As a country, I was actually really galled on budget day. On the same day that Community Housing Aotearoa released their report, which showed that we have record homelessness, the highest that has ever been recorded in the history of this country. Notably also in contrast to a lot of reading that I've been doing in the annals of history about how I believe it was 1986 or 1988 that we had the final report of the Housing Commission, who stated at that point in time that we did not have the same insoluble issues with homelessness as experienced in other jurisdictions. Of course, the Housing Commission was then disestablished in a wave of neoliberal reforms and state house sell-off and all of the rest, which provided us with the challenges we have today. But the key point there is that homelessness, child poverty, the degradation of our natural environment, these are not inevitable. They are the consequences of political decisions that have been made in the past and to this day. And the Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, had the gall in his speech on Budget Day to cite the welfare state and the fact that our great-grandparents had come together and built this amazing country, which was paid for by higher taxes on those who could afford it, who had benefited handsomely during a time of hardship for many, which gave us the foundations of these previously unprecedented things of public healthcare, public housing, and public education. And now we have a Prime Minister with so much cognitive dissonance that he can cite with pride that history while he actively proposes a budget undermining all of those things, all of those promises of this beautiful country. So I guess at the end of the day, what I'm also asking for is just some goddamn honest politics, mate.
Preach. Billionaire Steve Jobs said, "I didn't invent the language of mathematics I used. I make little of my own food, none of my own clothes. Everything I do depends on other members of our species and the shoulders that we stand on." I put to you that billionaires stand upon the shoulders of a society and draws their wealth and power from that society with minimal obligations placed upon them. They have benefited from an educated civil society but want to pay sweet bugger all for its upkeep. The Green Party tax policy recognises this truth and actually puts some solutions forward. Are you proud to be able to take that step forward?
I just think it's common sense at the end of the day. I think it's practical, and we've found that it's resonating with the vast majority of New Zealanders who feel instinctively right now. They also see it and experience it with their friends and family and kids moving overseas for greater opportunity, the ability to plan for the future. People know that things are wrong. And we need a very clear, as you say, bold, but I think just quite practical and straightforward plan to actually address these issues. So we have borrowed some of the best parts of our history And as you alluded to before in your introductory remarks, we are also looking forward to the challenges that we know we are facing with regard to the industrial revolution posed by AI.
Right.
The most insane thing about this industrial revolution is that we have some of the most explicitly nefarious, evil owners of those means of production.
Right.
But also the climate crisis.
Yes,
We're
yes.
sitting here in June. And there has been an excess of 20 climate change charged states of emergency declared just this year.
Right.
So we already know that we're in the hole for massive infrastructural deficits. Something has to give. And we're not actually 5 million people all running around this country in competition with each other. We are New Zealanders.
Yes.
We aren't competing for survival. We need to work together for that survival. And we can build some amazing things working together
Yes.
that very few of us could do individually or alone. And just the final point on your billionaire kind of proposition.
I don't like
there.
him. I don't like him. I don't.
Well,
I don't like him.
I don't. How on a really base level, how does one empathize with somebody who has the means to be able to end poverty or to end homelessness or to clean up our waterways, to deal with so many of these social and environmental ills, and still have more money than one could ever dream of spending in a lifetime left over, and decide not to do that?
Preach.
And then I think, of course, the basic point is just with every New Zealander who's currently looking overseas at the likes of the United States of America and wondering just how their economy got so unequal and their politics so toxic. Well, it's because they effectively tolerated a form of economics that we unfortunately are treading down the path of at the moment.
Preach.
And we can do so much better.
The Prime Minister has described your policy as economic lunacy, yet his government is the one borrowing $14 billion for tax cuts we couldn't afford, $3 billion for landlord loopholes, $300 million for big tobacco, and $200 million for gas and oil subsidies. Why is your policy lunacy and the right wing one isn't?
I don't know. I'm just every day that we present the facts and the evidence and regular people's experience in this place, and we're told that that's just not the way that the world works. I just am galled by how you can't negotiate or debate or even hope to have a rational discussion with somebody who doesn't believe that gravity exists. I'm being flippant, but I guess what we're talking about here.
You're right. You're absolutely right. It's flat earthers trying to talk about a geography
effectively
class.
A group of people who have decided that I have spent so long, because I'm an earnest nerd, and anybody who has been aware of me being in politics for the last 10 or so years will know this.
Yes.
I am an utter nerd, and I really try to understand why people think the way that they do.
Yep.
And I have spent the last 2.5 years sitting on the other side of the chamber trying so deeply to understand what it is that makes our Prime Minister and his cabinet ministers tick, to get them to the conclusion to make the decisions that they are, where they are actively hurting people in this country, some of the most vulnerable, some of the poorest New Zealanders, and choosing to stick the boot in as they are choosing to wind back protections for our environment and our climate. And I think where I have been leading myself astray is that I have been looking for a thread of logic that makes sense when it comes to trying to improve outcomes for regular people and for our environment, for the planet that we all share. And instead, the logic very much is predicated on extracting as much profit as possible for a very select group of people.
That's right. You can't have an argument with people who are in bad faith. Do you believe this election will be called on the night, or we will have to wait for the specials? And if we are waiting for the specials, how much more disingenuous does that make National's gerrymandering of the enrolment cutoffs?
Oh, don't get me started on the mask off voter suppression that is disallowing people from enrolling and voting at the same time. I just, we actually had, and I know that I'm not allowed to say this in the House, Mr. Speaker, I was waiting in the wings, but it's an active lie. You have a situation where government ministers said the reason that they were progressing with these changes was to speed up the count for the election. Then we had the Electoral Commission come in front of Select Committee and say that that actually was not the case. This would not speed up the count. The government pushed ahead with it anyway, despite that lie being proven to be an outright lie.
And that will disenfranchise 400,000 voters, right?
Knowingly and intentionally, much like I would say that they knowingly and intentionally have increased homelessness, because I don't know what else you're supposed to call it when you are forewarned by your own officials, by experts, by social service providers, that the policy that you intend to push ahead with is going to create more homelessness.
Right.
You push ahead with that policy anyway, and we end up with more homelessness.
And the solution is to criminalise them, to actually imprison them now. Unbelievable.
And now we're at that point.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's just, and this is why I made the point in my budget speech that, as the government was also actively cutting funding and support for those who are in housing insecurity, and the government was choosing instead to plough hundreds of millions of dollars into increasing prison capacity, that perhaps this government's housing strategy is in fact prison.
Unbelievable. Finally, comrade, the Kakariki Alliance voting strategy is calling on Te Pāti Māori voters and the Māori electorates to candidate vote Te Pāti Māori, but party vote Green, which recycles wasted TPM vote while generating an overhang for all the electorates won. If this government is as terrible as progressives believe it is, and this election is going to be as close as many believe it to be, shouldn't voters vote tactically under MMP?
I think, look, I say this as somebody who, during the Auckland Central 2020 election, everybody said that it was impossible that we could flip a seat from National Blue to Green Party Green.
That's true.
Especially when we had the then most popular Prime Minister in a generation having been unable to clinch it for Labour. However, what we saw there is that all of the preaching to people about voting tactically means absolutely nothing if people don't actually believe in and participate in our democracy. Yes. So that grassroots campaign is what changed everything. People throwing off the shackles of the ideas of what it is that you are supposed to do. Yeah. So I think that it is really important that people do understand MMP, and they do understand that if they want a change of government, and they want to change, not only a change of government, but a government of change that is actually going to implement meaningful progressive policy and not just tinker around the edges, then that is a party vote for the Green Party. And that is how you will get the strongest Labour Party, might I add.
I know, right? You'll actually help them do the right thing, those little weaklings. Okay, thank you, Chloe, for your insight and oversight. We will talk with you again next month. Thank you, comrade.
You got it, mate.
Cheers. The political panel all-stars up shortly, Whānau, but now this week's extra 1-on-1 in 10 with the Speaker of the House, the Right Honourable Gerry Brownlee, on the quality of democracy under his time as Speaker, his thoughts on Scrutiny Week, and why democracy is so bloody important. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful. Can you hear me? Please.
Sorry.
Oh,
Mr. Bradbury, apologies. You're not coming through very loud.
Okay, I'll be...
Please note, I called you Mr. Bradbury.
I'll be louder. Mr. Speaker, you have been Speaker now for almost one full term as a Parliament TV geek, policy nerd, and Democratic Institute fanboy. I think your stewardship as Speaker and defender of debate in Parliament has been right up there with the mighty Lockwood Smith. What have been your highlights and lowlights in your first term as Speaker?
Oh, look, I think, what we're seeing at the moment in Parliament is the first time that we've had a genuinely MMP government where not one of the parties could do anything without the other two. And similarly, you're seeing a sort of in the opposition bench, it's a similar arrangement where there's no particular dominance in the opposition side either. So that creates a very interesting dynamic in Parliament, and one that I certainly haven't seen in my time before. So I suppose that's if you're a real geek for democracy, then I think that's a positive. The low light still has to be the tearing up of the bill and the international sort of focus that came on that after, and then it wasn't the haka that followed. It was, in fact, the interruption of a vote, the attempt to prevent a vote from being called, even though the position that party was taking was going to win the day. So, perhaps a lack of understanding by even people who are working in the place about how important democracy and consideration is.
Well, let's talk about that, because many in Aotearoa, New Zealand, were angry over the ruling against Te Pāti Māori members when they performed their haka. But you were, as you're pointing out, standing for very important principles that are sacrosanct in a place like Parliament. What were those principles, and did you agree with the unprecedented punishment that was handed out?
Well, first point is what I'm saying is that when you've finished the debate and you're voting, then everyone should be silent and respect the votes that are being cast by the various parties who've been elected into the parliament. And in that case, that wasn't respected, and that's an absolute breach of the trust that everyone has that our democracy is a safe place to exercise your views. And so, if they'd come along earlier and said, at the end of the bill, when the result is declared by the clerk, or the speaker, I should say, then we would like to, perform a haka. That probably wouldn't have been a problem, because we often have that at the end of treaty settlement bills and other such. And we live in this country, not in any other Western democracy. So that's not really what the problem was. And I think the real point is that Parliament should be a place where people can come and express the views that they want to. I've just listened respectfully to Chloe's views. She would know that I don't agree with many of those views, but my job is to make sure that she and others have the opportunity to express those views in our Parliament.
During Scrutiny Week, you said that there would need to be a relocation of Parliament for repairs. Can you give us an idea of what kind of repairs, how long you think they'll take, and would Parliament itself have to be relocated?
No, it's not the Parliament building, it's the beehive itself, the executive wing. That building was built somewhere between 1972 and 1979. Took about 7 or 8 years to build the thing. And that's now, 50-something years ago. And buildings tend to be built with a life of about 50 years. So things like the ventilation system is in pretty bad shape. The electrical wiring is in bad shape. It's had many internal alterations of type, smaller maybe rather than larger. But also the exterior is showing signs of concrete fatigue. Those fins on the outside are actually structural, and all the windows are starting to leak because they're steel and single glaze. So a lot of that sort of just work that is very noisy. We also have, not the best deployment of space in that building. The idea would be to have 28 ministerial suites in there rather than the current 18. So to do all that, you do need to substantially vacate the building. And that's something that a future Parliament, I think the next Parliament, in fact, is going to have to wrestle with. Where
would they relocate to, Gerry? If you did have to go ahead with those kind of repairs and that upgrade, where would the ministers go?
There is a brand new building about to be commissioned next March to the rear of Parliament, and there's an opportunity for some relocation into there. And there are other spaces nearby. Some floors in Bowen House may be available, although I've got to say they're ridiculously expensive. And then, of course, you've got other government buildings nearby, so that the Treasury building, which they only occupy a number of floors in there, there might be some space in there. But there's also the Parliamentary Library, which is likely to be more available now that there's I think a more sensible look taken at some of the seismic requirements for buildings. So those are options that people would have to consider in the future.
You also argued in Scrutiny Week that Parliament needs more sitting days. Why is that?
No, not sitting days. I think sitting hours. It could be achieved by sitting more days. But if you added an hour a day, you'd effectively pick up 5 weeks in a year. So that's the sort of calculation that I've asked parties to consider at the present time while we're going through the standing orders review. Parliament sits at the moment between 2 and 10 p.m. For 2 days a week, and between 2 and 6 p.m. on the Thursday. If those days all started at 1 o'clock, you'd still be able to have the mornings for caucus meetings, for select committees, and you would pick up that extra time.
You recently reached out to Stuff columnist Verity Johnston, who was on my team, who was a teammate for Thursday's Keith Locke Memorial Debate, and you wanted to sincerely convey to her that democracy is worth fighting for. And she was genuinely moved by your authenticity at a time when very ugly populist movements are threatening Western nations around the world and people have given up on our institutions. Why is fighting for democracy so important?
It's hard to understand what freedoms we could lose when you live in a country like ours where you have quite considerable freedoms and you can feel no threat when you say things that might potentially in other jurisdictions be considered so terrible that you'd be taken off the streets. It's very hard for people to get their heads around that, but you don't have to look too far around the world to see that sort of thing happening. I think there are some really interesting influences around the moment. I have concern about AI and what it is doing and what it might do to influence information flows. We've already got the scourge of social media. When I say scourge, only from the point of view of the negative stuff, there's a heck of a lot of good stuff around that.
Yep.
It's like, we shouldn't be frightened of this. People used to be frightened of electricity and internal combustion cars.
No one wants to be a Luddite.
Probably is now because of the CO2 emissions. But the point is that technology, if you embrace it in the correct way, it'll be good for society. But when you start to lose those basic points that every man and woman should be free to express themselves and to live within the constraints of society's rules and agreed rules. If you're looking at losing that, it's not tidy.
Finally, comrade, talking of the quality of democracy, in its first 400 days, this government used urgency to push 133 stages across 51 unique bills, with 57% of those stages applied to laws rushed through Parliament in a single day without a select committee process. We've been talking about how important believing in democracy is. How can abusing urgency to ram through controversial legislation without the due process and democratic scrutiny 57% of the time be good for democracy?
Well, that statistic just proves my point. Parliament needs more time. And we have the pressure these days of everyone wanting stuff in a hurry and parties wanting to get their manifesto promises out there as quickly as they possibly can. When you're limited by time, naturally there's going to be a desire to use the urgency process. But I'll tell you what, every government's done it. It's not something that's new. And I can remember people railing against Michael Cullen for regularly putting the House into urgency. I remember myself being criticised for putting the House into urgency, and we both had similar roles in government. And it's carrying on. The issue is, how do you create more time? And I think one other thing is that the modern technology that we have now is meaning that far more people are making submissions on bills than they ever have in the past. And that's also, once again, puts that pressure on time. So I don't think it's the terrible abuse that some people seem to want to think it is. We have a short electoral system, a term, I should say, 3 years, and people get to have their say at the end of it. It's it's all about time.
Thank you, Gerry, for sharing your insight and oversight this evening. All power to your arm. Let's talk to you again before the election. Thank you, comrade.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bradbury, and carry on. You can say what you like. We are living in a free country.
Amen. Preach it, brother. Okay, now to our political panel all-stars. Andrew Little, get out of the way, because there is a new cheerleader for the capital in town. Our first panellist is a libertarian Svengali and moral shepherd of the right. Former New Zealand Herald columnist and now editor of The Post. Born-again Wellingtonian. It's absolutely positively Dr. Matthew Hooton. Kia ora, comrade.
Evening.
One word to describe the week, please, sir.
Inspiring. I've just come from the Michelin.
Oh, right. How was it?
Well,
Worth $6 million?
I was
it
an
worth $6 million?
extreme skeptic
Right.
of this.
Yes, as I am.
You know,
And me.
$6 million,
And me.
taxpayers' dollar money and all that sort of thing. But what I saw was an industry which has been under
A lot of
strain.
problem. Yep.
And there were the leaders of that industry, and there were more than 110 restaurants that were honoured in some way.
Yep.
And the world's first, the first Michelin star ever to be given to a Samoan restaurant was announced.
How are the canapes?
And I didn't know. To tell you the truth, I had some.
Had to rush here, right?
Well, actually, I stopped for McDonald's, which
Can't say that.
no, but some people argue McDonald's deserves a Michelin star for
Nobody argues
consistency.
that.
Well, sure,
They do
sure,
because
sure.
one of the criteria is consistency.
Right.
But anyway, I saw it and they were great people, and
They're needing some help,
Maybe
aren't
I've
they?
just drunk the Kool-Aid, but it was a fantastic night, and there were 110 restaurants. There were, I think, 14 got Michelin stars, and there were very emotional people whose career had been
Sure.
recognised at the highest level within their industry, and so I was kind of
Love for them.
in favour of the $6 million at the end of it.
Our second panellist is the first son of Auckland, a militant cyclist and ceaseless campaigner for a better world on the side of the Angels, urban architecture and probably veganism. This Thursday he is facing off against myself and my team in the Keith Locke Memorial Free Speech Debate. I'm going to beat him. Listener, columnist and soon-to-be defeated debater Simon Wilson. Kia ora, comrade.
Kia
One
ora,
word-
comrade, I've just got to say, every time you have me on this show, you say, and probably vegan, and I've got to tell you, the dinner I cooked for myself tonight with a blood sausage was so good.
One word, please, sir.
One word. Well, before I get to my one word, I just want to say I'm a little bit disappointed, Matthew. You've been wined and dined, and suddenly you're...
I didn't need a thing.
Didn't need a thing.
It didn't even cost them anything.
Like that.
They were
skeptic
pouring
and now you're not.
champagne, and I didn't
it's
take
amazing.
any.
There you
Wow.
go. My one word is party vote.
Yes.
There's an awful
That's
lot
two
of talk.
words.
No, you just run it
I
together.
see.
Party vote. Because there's an awful lot of talk these days about people who are clever and split their votes and they tactically vote and all the rest of it. Party votes are important. There are two votes. They're not equal. The party vote is the vote you should give to the party that represents what you think the most, the party you want to have the greatest influence in politics. And if you want to vote for someone who you like the look of as a candidate, do that by all means. But your party vote is the one that counts.
Preach. Brothers and sisters, let's get into tonight's show. Issue 1, Labour Congress versus ACT Party Conclave versus New Zealand First Conspiracy Fest. Who won? Issue 2, TVNZ poll, will Top be the kingmaker? And issue 3 tonight, the Keith Locke Memorial Debate this Thursday, free debate versus hate speech. Plus, we'll have a final word at the end of the show where each panellist, it is going to be for now, each panellist gets to go to the mountaintop to see who breaches broadcasting standards this week. My money is on John Tamahiri, and he's not even on tonight's show. Let's kick things off with issue 1. And that was the Labour Congress, ACT Party Conclave and the New Zealand First Fan Fiction Fest that all occurred over the weekend. What can we glean from them? Matthew, New Zealand First leader Winston Peters addressed a packed public meeting of over 600 people in Hastings over the weekend and showcased candidates like former disgraced Labour Minister Stuart Nash, former All Black and walking case study in concussion, Tane Randall, and anti-abortionist Alfred Naro. They joined candidates like Conservative Party leader Colin Craig and Hobson's pledge Christo-fascist Elliot Aikili. Is New Zealand First a political party or a cavalcade of political circus freaks?
Well, it's a very broad church. That
Oh, Jesus, is it broad? That's the broadest church in the world.
So, well, the thing I noticed about the event was the speech that Winston Peters gave.
Yep.
Which was a full attack on the government's signature foreign policy
Right.
achievement, the India Free Trade Agreement.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with that deal or not, Prime Minister Luxon, when he was in opposition, promised it. Everyone laughed at him and said it was impossible, and it has happened. It wouldn't have happened without the Prime Minister. It's the number one achievement of his foreign policy.
Yeah,
Sure.
that's true.
And his foreign minister is attacking it. Now, you might say, oh, well, that's okay because it's New Zealand First. hat, not the foreign minister's hat. I did see one trade policy commentator, Stephen Jacoby, said that this is embarrassing for New Zealand.
That's right, he did.
I'm interested in exploring that a bit more. I just wonder if, the embassies in Wellington, they'll understand what's going on here, but it just seems incredible that when Winston Peters is overseas wearing his foreign minister's hat, reading the talking points and making the case on behalf of the government, he would be defending that deal. He would be saying to other countries that it's a good thing.
You might say that the embassies understand it. How do voters understand it? Because presumably if this government gets back in, they're going to stop fighting over these things and they're going to come together again.
Are they?
Are they? Or are they going to keep on fighting?
Or will
and we'll
it
have
just
3 more years of ever more disunity.
Let me ask a question on that. Let me ask a question. If New Zealand First can form a government with National after the next election, let's say they can, using a candidate list like that, how much weaker will Chris Luxon become and how much weirder will New Zealand politics get? Because those are some pretty out there Fruit Loops.
Well, those are your words, not mine.
They are my words. Of course, they're my words.
He can't say that.
And that's a matter about reasonable minds could differ and all blah blah. Having
But
said
they're
all
not
that,
reasonable minds. Come on.
I think
These people
I think the
aren't.
senior people of the New Zealand First Party would roughly be the same. And some would argue that relative to some of the people that are going to be on the list, those leading people in New Zealand First are more mainstream and mature politicians.
Oh, that's a big,
a
broad
stretch.
church.
Well, it is a broad church, but I think if the government is re-elected, but New Zealand First is much stronger than it is now, National's quite a bit weaker, and ACT is the same, or a bit weaker.
Right.
I think that the Foreign Affairs Ministry would not be sufficient for the New Zealand First Party. I think they will seek the Treasurer role.
Prime Minister?
Well, no,
Prime Minister
no,
for 12 months.
potentially, but I think that realistically, if the election comes in at sort of high 20s for National, high teens for New Zealand First, 6 for ACT, then I think that New Zealand First Party will seek and would be entitled to the lead role in finance rather than foreign affairs. And that's the portfolio, I think, because it would be a similar result to 96.
Sure.
That's the precedent.
Simon,
I agree with that.
ACT had their election conference over the weekend, and the mother of guns, Nicole McKee, became deputy of ACT, meaning the gun fetishists have more power as a faction inside ACT than the pro-Israel lobby, because if the pro-Israel lobby had more power, Simon Court would be the deputy. By electing a gun nut as their deputy, are ACT more extreme, and will that help their election chances?
Well, I want to say yes and no to that. I want to say first that yes, more extreme. Nicole McKee went into politics and went into ACT to secure the gun lobby's role in government. And she's been extraordinarily successful in that.
Right.
And that is a very frightening thing. I want to say that's true. But I also want to say that Nicole McKee, if you are taking out what you think of their politics, is a very effective politician. Simon Court a little less so. So it isn't surprising that Nicole McKee, simply on the level of competence, got the job, got the nod ahead of Simon
Really?
Court.
Follow-up question. ACT are the anti-nanny state party, yet they declared at their conclave to want more control over what beneficiaries can and can't buy. Why is it free market liberty for the rich and a kick in the balls for the poor?
Well, ACT is the party that looks after people and punishes people consistently in terms of who it regards as its supporters and its base. So it is an extremely, to use that phrase, nanny party, in the sense that it actively organises politics to look after certain interests and actively says you can do this and you can do this and you guys can't do that. That has always been their way.
Matthew, Labour's Congress showed everyone their members want a revolution, but the very mild policy agenda suggests the Wellington Labour mandarins, who are forever preaching incrementalism, are still in control. Can Labour match the expectations of their own voters?
Well, the small target strategy is a time-honoured one in politics. It often works. For people seeking power, it's difficult to argue, for them to not want to do it because it does work. As, John Key ran, Helen Clark really ran it in her 99 in particular, with her pledge card, just 5 things, and people would look at, say, the Bolger government in 1990 did the opposite. They had all sorts of policies. Anyway, it's a legitimate tactic and it does work. And if people think that they should be the government and their enemies should be out of government, you can see how tempting it is. I do think, however, that we've had so much of the small target strategy from the Ardern government, with some exceptions which they probably wish they had been smaller target on, like Kiwi Build, obviously, and the Key government was small target. Clark, I think that New Zealanders are now seeing that they have some serious problems, that they're sick of sloganeering and parties that don't really seem to have any vision. And I wonder, and I think that perhaps Labour may be getting out of line with public demand for a little more substance. They did launch a policy at their conference on apprenticeships, which is all fine, whatever, and they've done some other small policies, but I think what the National Party picked up was that more substance was wanted from them, and there has been more substance from them, and Labour, I think, is yet to make that adjustment in full.
Simon, Sir Keir Starmer followed the Wellington Labour Mandarin's incrementalism, and he was dumped by embittered Labour members. Why is New Zealand Labour following in his failed incremental footsteps and not harnessing the energy of Zuhan Mamdani's policies?
Yeah, so I think that's a slight misreading, and I think, Matthew, also a slight misreading. There is managerialism is embedded in the DNA of the Labour Party.
Jesus, is it what?
Absolutely. So you see it in Hipkins, you see it in Andrew Little, the way he's running Wellington, you saw it in Phil Goff, the way he ran Auckland. It's just manage the problems in front of you. There is no larger purpose to it. That is what they have trained themselves to do. However, I think there is another thing that is happening in the world on the centre-left, and it is Mamdani is a part of it, Andy Burnham is a part of it, and that is that they, on the centre-left, parties are saying, we do stand for workers, we do stand for doing something about cost of living. So you look at Labour's slogans now, cost of living, jobs, homes, housing, they are reverting back to those core messages, and they are, I think, trying to learn something from Mamdani, from Burnham, and from others, that these are the issues that we need to be focused on. These are the issues that need to define our DNA now. They've got a big hill to climb because the lesson isn't just that you say those things as slogans. The lesson is that you've actually got to do them, and you've got to do them by restructuring the economy. You've got to do them by having a much more progressive policy platform than the Labour has yet rolled out.
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 2 tonight, and that is last week's TVNZ poll showing the opposition could form a government. Labour are on 32, National were on 29, Greens are on 13, New Zealand First were on 11, ACT 6, TPM 1.8, Top scored 4.6%, Don't Knows were incredibly high at 14%, and the Roy Morgan poll that just came out last hour, Labour 25.5, National 31, Greens 13.5, ACT 9.5, New Zealand First 10.5, TPM 3, and Top 6.5. Simon, Kiwis like their bigotry full-flavoured. They don't like it diet or low-carb. ACT offers right-wingers the fig leaf of libertarianism to hide their shame, but reactionary voters like their necks red and their World Health Organization put on a Nuremberg trial with public show hangings. Has ACT's brand of reactionary politics been eclipsed by New Zealand First's gumboot fascism?
Well, I think one of the things about the Roy Morgan poll is that, Roy Morgan is reputed to spend money to do a serious poll at election time and comes in traditionally pretty close to the outcome, but at this stage of the process, maybe a little less so. I wouldn't read too much into the ACT result in that Roy Morgan. basically, ACT has been declining in the polls this year and is pretty consistent across all the other polls.
Yeah.
And I take great heart from that. No, it won't be a surprise to anybody, I'm sure.
New Zealand's a nicer place, isn't it? When ACT's at 6%.
But your question is, have people all fled across to New Zealand First? Well, I think that's probably true, and we've seen Shane Jones ramping up the reactionary attitude this week. He loves it.
Yeah.
He just loves it.
Follow-up question.
And Seymour clearly is rattled by it.
Follow-up question. According to a new Audit Office report, just over 50% of lunches in the government's free school lunch program meet nutritional standards, while up to 20,000 are being returned uneaten every single day. This is the most obvious example of what ACT does to public services. Makes them cheaper and crap. Why would you want ACT to do that to other public services?
Well, I think that the simple thing take out from that is that ACT isn't serious about improving the quality of or the quality of the public service of school lunches. ACT simply wants to save money and get that away, because those are the people in its view don't matter.
Matthew,
what else is there to say?
National in the 20s is leadership rolling time. What will save Christopher Luxon from getting stabbed in the back now? You being the editor of the Post?
Well, I think there isn't an obvious Andy Burnham there to step up. And, people make a comparison with the Andrew Little, Jacinda Ardern situation. God, how long? 9 years ago now. God, we're old. Anyway, 9 years ago
You
now.
think 9 is a long time?
It just seems like, it seems like the other day that all that was happening. But anyway, she was already more popular than Andrew Little. She was a serious national figure, and that isn't the case of Chris Bishop or Nicola Willis or Erica Stanford. They're just not. So I think the Prime Minister is safe through to the election. Let's say National goes down another 2 to 27. There might be another round of jittery backbenchers and so forth. They're all going to be wiped out at the election. But I don't see them doing that change.
I think there's another element to that. Since the budget, Nicola Willis has been front and centre on an awful lot of national responses, and it does not seem to have translated into a rise in support for her.
Well, certainly not
or
for
the party.
Follow-up question.
If
New Zealand First leapfrog the Greens as the third largest party, is it all over Rover for a progressive change in government? If New Zealand First gets higher than the Greens?
Well, no, because it's absolutely too close to call. I mean, most of the polls show you there's two factions, if you like, and in Parliament, two three-headed monsters, and both of those monsters are pretty much even at the moment, and it could go any way.
Quick round to both of you. Who will be the kingmaker, Winston or Chlöe?
Chlöe much more than Winston. Winston's not a kingmaker anymore. Winston is on the centre-right side.
Right.
I don't think there's any question about
He's
that.
not going with Labour,
He's not going with Labour. And it's not just that he's said he's not, and it's not just that Hipkins has ruled it out. It's not just those things. It's that New Zealand's first history is when they go with Labour, they get kicked out in the next election. They know that now. They discovered it. What was it? 2011 they discovered it. 24, one of those elections, they discovered it and got kicked out. Maybe that was an anomaly. Turns out it wasn't, because they discovered it again in 2020.
Yeah, but they got kicked out when they were with National in 99.
But what they have now is their voter base is conservative. Their voter base does not want a Labour government, does not want them to prop it up, and they will punish them for it. And the same thing applies. The same thing applies to Top.
Yeah.
If Top goes with National, they will be punished by theirs.
Well, I think that there is no particular kingmaker, and I think Top, it would be felt would go with the left if that were the
doing my best.
However, I think what's more interesting is if things get quite dynamic, because if it were a situation where there really couldn't be a left-wing government, but there could be a national ACT, New Zealand First government, or there could be a national Top New Zealand First government, or then maybe the pressure would go on Chlöe and Top. Similarly, if there wasn't a possibility of a national New Zealand First ACT government, But there was a possibility of a Labour New Zealand First government to keep out the dangerous communists and the Greens and the Maori radicals at TPM, then Winston Peters would then come under pressure to perhaps look at Labour despite everything, and he would have an excuse for having done that. So I think both Top and New Zealand First have the potential to be kingmakers in situations which are unexpected and dynamic.
Comrades, we need to move on to issue 3 tonight, and that is the Keith Locke Memorial Debate being held 7 p.m. this Thursday. This year, the moot is hate speech laws threaten free speech. It is being moderated by the amazing Professor Jane Kelsey, and the affirmative team is captained by myself, with Verity Johnson and Thomas Beagle, and the negative team by Simon Wilson and his team of Anjum Rahman and Yasmin Surhan.
What's the moot?
The moot
that
is
hate speech laws threaten free speech.
now tickets.
Bomber, you'll win that easily,
Tickets
won't
are
you?
now tickets are now sold out.
You say that
Tickets
now.
are now sold out, but the debate will be streamed live, and we'll give you details about that this week. Matthew, you're now the editor of the Post. Where is the line? Now you're an editor. Where do you believe the line philosophically is between free speech and hate speech in New Zealand? For example, Bishop Brian Tamaki this morning live streamed police raiding his house for his guns after he incited his supporters to purge New Zealand of Hindus, Muslims and Sikhs while calling on his followers to burn down their temples and mosques. Should he be arrested for hate speech?
Well, you'd have to say he's to be commended for the wideness of his hatred. It's not a narrow.
I don't think you'd have to say
It's
that.
not a narrow hatred. He's
very inclusive in his hate,
it's an
isn't he?
inclusive
He's
hatred.
not
really.
inclusive.
I mean,
That's absolutely not true.
If he was in India, you'd say it incorporates everybody. He's like the
is of
Gandhi in
immigrants.
reverse, if you know what I mean. Anyway, that wasn't entirely serious. But I think with Brian Tamaki, I think it's good that he feels safe legally expressing
away
his
with it.
hatred because it reveals what a hateful person he is. And it also reveals to a certain extent what a dangerous person he is. And I think people should be able to express hatred of other people, including of other groups, as a matter of principle, but also because it's useful for those for us to know the people who do feel that way. And I do think he has probably, it looks to me, I mean, the law is this. You can say that you want to kill the Jews or gas the Gazans or whatever, but you can't say, let's go and do it now.
And he kind of did. And he kind of
so
did.
you can say, you could say in the
He
abstract.
pretty much did. He didn't
That's
use the
right.
word now, but he
What?
said do it.
Now that's right. So I'm not a lawyer on this. It's something I think the police will look into.
Sure they will.
But it may well be that our current law does criminalise what he said.
Thank God.
Potentially,
Thank
right?
God.
And so I'm just not sure. I just don't know the cases of hate speech
It's very
that
rarely
aren't
used.
currently illegal, which I think should become
It's
illegal.
that's interesting because what you're saying is that actually there is a line and it shouldn't be crossed. We're not sure where that line is in relation to the
incitement
law
is
at the
usually
moment.
the line.
Right?
Yeah.
And
But
he kind of is.
that was a pretty inciting speech
Right?
he made.
Right?
Yeah. Anyway, you've got a question for me.
Do you want to concede defeat tonight, or do you want to battle it out on Thursday? What's your
I want to say
position?
that the underlying principle in what Matthew just said is essentially that if we allow hate speech, it's a safety valve in our democracy.
No.
I think that's wrong. I think hate speech isn't a safety valve. Hate speech is an incitement to violence. And therefore, we need a democracy and rules and regulations around it that recognise that there are people who use hate speech to incite violence, and it has real-world consequences. We know that in this country, and my God, we may learn it again from what Brian Tamaki just did.
Comrades, we need to wrap the show with a final word. Simon, your final word this week.
My final word is Thursday evening. This free speech is going to be an exciting debate, I think. I've got Anjum Rahman on my team, who
The amazing.
we were talking today, and she has a lot of things to say, particularly about the mosque massacre, of course, and we're going to have a really interesting time talking about why it is that we're even talking about free speech in the way we are, because it's not just a democratic issue. It's about how power is being used by people who have it to defend themselves at the moment. So we'll be there for you, Bomber, and we're going to have
Looking forward to it. Looking
your
forward to it,
jaw will
comrade.
be on the floor, mate.
Looking forward to it. Matthew, your final word this week, please.
Final word is about the national ticketing solution, which I now see that the two political parties, National Labour, are trying to blame one another for it. It's, 1 point something billion dollars. There is a trial now underway after many years' work, and only 271 million have been spent. There is a trial going on, I think, in Temuka.
Yes.
But many years ago, when I was a lobbyist, I worked for a company called Thales. It's a French company. And it pitched to do the Auckland
I remember
Hop
them.
Card.
Yeah, that's right.
And I thought that we charged $70 million, but I've read it in the media, maybe it was only something like 24 to put in the hop. I don't know. The figure I had in my head was 70 million, which is $200 million less than what's been spent to not
Do not do it.
implement
Do not do
the
it.
national ticketing solution. And that was a big enough, it's not that long, there hasn't been that much inflation. It was a big enough contract that I got sent to Dubai to do some stuff for them as part of the pitching process. So it wasn't like it was, and what they had done the Oyster card. I think they'd done Singapore, Hong Kong, Dubai, and what they sold to Auckland Transport or whoever it was at the time was just what we've done before, and it was slightly controversial even at 70 million. And now we've got to a situation where that would be seen as ultra cheap. And I can't say what I was going to say
Matthew,
in my new role.
I'm sure you'll disagree with me, and you were there, but I want to say that this is a classic example of where the market went wrong. As I understand it, back in those days, there was a plan, yes, for a national system. Snapper in Wellington, owned by Infratil,
that's right.
said, we're just going to go ahead and do it.
That's right.
Auckland went, we can't get in with Snapper. That's not going to work for us. We're going to do our own thing, and it just
snowballed.
Could I just say that the Thales lobbyists were very good and kept Snapper well out of that contract in the end?
Yeah, but because Snapper existed, the whole nationwide project ground to a halt.
Well, they had a different business model. But the less said about that, the better.
better.
Bit of central regulation would have helped a lot
Amen.
back in the day.
Thank you, comrades. And now to my final word. Brothers and sisters, it is sick that the Redress System for Abuse and Care Bill passed its third reading last week with such little media attention. Despite the royal inquiry into the despicable historical abuse of 200,000 kids in state care, specifically demanding an independent panel to decide compensation, the government instead have made their apology hollow by setting up a state agency designed to find ways of eliminating victims of state abuse from gaining any compensation. Survivors of abuse by the state will now have to go back to that very same state to claim compensation. How the risen Christ is that justice? It isn't just the appalling abuse. It is the decades the state spent fighting survivors in court with the kind of appalling legal tactics that would make your average South American cartel blush with shame. Adding insult to injury, the government rammed through a system designed to limit the liability on the state rather than provide compensation for those it abused. Stopping victims from applying for compensation because they've committed crimes later in life is outrageous when you consider that 80% of gang members from Māori-dominated gangs were abused while in state care. A state who has abused kids, spent decades fighting them in court, and now passing a system that protects the state is power at its most venal. We should all feel pretty ashamed at this hollow, disingenuous and cruel apology. I will see everyone this Thursday night, 7 p.m, for the Keith Locke Memorial Debate. We'll be streaming it live online and hopefully on stuff. In solidarity, the revolution continues. Ka pai Aotearoa.
The Bradbury Group, New Zealand's best weekly political argument. The Bradbury Group is an independent podcast through the Rover Network, sponsored by Wātea News. Everything on the show is an opinion and shouldn't be taken seriously enough to attempt defamation action against us. We were joking. We're never serious about anything. And officially, a small wetter in Avondale is legally the owner. Good luck finding him. Don't forget to follow, like and comment.